Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're the hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every day, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the City of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can view all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues that affect you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here this evening to learn more about the upcoming operating referendum for the City of Fitchburg and to have a discussion in regards to that particular referendum. As you all probably know, that referendum is on the November 5th ballot. My name is Chad Brecklin, and I serve as the City Administrator here in Fitchburg. In my role with the city, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the city, as well as carrying out policy directions from the Mayor and Common Council. During our time today, we'll plan to walk through some slides via presentation here that provide an overview of the city's challenges, the referendum itself, and the impacts of a vote for or against the referendum. Following the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. It is our hope that you walk away from today's discussion with answers to any questions you may have, and that you feel as though you are informed as you're heading into the voting booth on November 5th. Prior to beginning the presentation, I want to acknowledge the elected officials that we have with us today in the room. Mayor Arata Frada, Alder Gabriella Gerhardt, and Alder Bill Jetzer. Mayor, did you want to say anything before I start the presentation?
Thank you. Yep. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here today to learn more about the referendum. I want to mention that we started this process 18 months ago, in June of 23. The discussion about the referendum started before, I would say the previous mayor already allocated some funds from ARPA funds to start the discussion about this referendum. So for the last 18 months, the council had plenty of discussion, meetings, about what are the possible sources of revenues, that we can pursue to absorb the cost of this growing community. So, and eventually at the end of August, the council decided that the referendum was one of the options. So, the council and myself and staff, we didn't take this option lightly, okay? I know this is very difficult because we are asking you practically to increase your taxes. We are going to explain how much is and why we need to do that. But, I live in the city of Fitchburg too. I don't want to pay more taxes, but we are asking you for this, to listen to us, why we need to do that. There is a lot of miscommunication and misinformation in social media. So, and if you have any question, okay, this is the time to ask because we have the data. So with that in mind, I will stay here for questions, but I thank you very much for being here today and for listening to why we need to go to this referendum.
Thank you, Mayor. Also, before I begin, introduce Alder Jay Allen, who has also just arrived as well. So we'll get started with the presentation, and I'll work my way through the slides. It's probably about 20 to 25 minutes, just so if you guys are curious how long the presentation will be, that's about what it's timing out to be. So what's this all about? The City of Fitchburg has identified a need for additional funding to increase staffing and invest in services to meet the increasing needs of our growing community. This is a topic we've been exploring, as the mayor has mentioned, as a community for many months. We've done an options assessment report that was published in spring, and we also sent a community-wide survey also this spring that was sent to all residential addresses within the City of Fitchburg to receive input on this particular topic of a referendum. As we've shared along the way, with the City of Fitchburg community growing, the demand for city services, including public safety and other core municipal services, is increasing. In the chart you can see behind me, there's one measure of that particular growth. Between 2013 and 2023, Fitchburg's population has increased by nearly 34%. That is the green line that is on this graph. For context, our growth has significantly outpaced the population growth in the state of Wisconsin. During that same time period, the state of Wisconsin as a whole grew around 3%. The other line that you'll see on this particular chart is the blue line. That is the percent change in city staffing over the same time period. That change has been approximately 18% change in the number of city employees during that same time period. So it's important to note, the takeaway from this slide is that clearly city staffing has not kept pace with the amount of population growth the city has seen. Let's start by taking a look at our public safety services, and in this case, our fire department in particular. Between 2013 and 2022, our fire department saw a nearly 40% increase in the calls for service that they respond to. That's represented by the green line in the chart. The blue line in the chart is this change in staffing that is associated with the particular staffing situation in the fire department. As the number of calls have increased, our part-time paid on-premises staffing has declined. That was the blue line that you saw in that graph with the decline is largely related to the decrease in part-time staff in our fire department. That is not a trend that is unique to Fitchburg. That is a national trend in which we're seeing less folks with time available to volunteer and or work part-time, and Fitchburg is not unique in that particular regard. As you can imagine, as call for services have been increasing, the average response time has also been increasing. Longer response times can partially be attributed to the need for more mutual aid requests in order to respond for those increasing numbers of calls for service. Mutual aid happens when a neighboring fire department is requested to come into the city to either serve as primary response until our fire teams get there, or to help assist our fire teams depending upon the nature of the incident. Obviously, when we're requesting fire departments to respond from outside the community, it is going to take longer for them to arrive than it would for a fire crew to arrive from within the community. Additional funding is also needed not only to add fire department full-time staff, but also to increase the hourly rate of our part-time staff. They are currently paid $12 an hour as a base rate, and then they are eligible to earn additional hourly rate increases based on the number of trainings and certifications they obtain, as well as the length of time they are with the department. This referendum funding, portion of it would be utilized to increase the hourly rate for those part-time firefighters from $12 an hour to a minimum of $15 an hour. Again, in an effort to ideally try to recruit more part-time firefighters, but also to retain the numbers that we currently have. Moving on to the police department, you can see on this slide that between 2013 and 2022, there was an approximate 22% increase in the calls for service that our police department is responding to. And as you can imagine, with the staff that we have, it continues to become increasingly difficult to meet the growing public safety demands with the staff that we have available. Our police department, in order to try to address some of the staffing challenges that they have, submitted for a federal Department of Justice COPS grant, which would allow them to hire 3 additional police officers. That would fund, if awarded, actually I'm sorry, this grant was awarded to the city by the federal Department of Justice, and that grant would allow 3 police officers to be hired with a cost share. The federal government would share 1/3 of the cost. The city would share the other 2/3 of the cost over a 3-year period. That grant totals about $375,000 in value, and funding from this referendum would allow the city to accept this federal grant and therefore allow those 3 police officers to be hired with partial grant funding. Without additional funding that this referendum would provide, it is unlikely that the City of Fitchburg Police Department will be able to accept this grant and will have to turn down that $375,000 in grant funding. In addition, the City of Fitchburg has space needs at its facilities. This has been an issue that has been examined for about 10 years now. There was a study conducted back in 2014 that identified space needs in our police department and City Hall. Our police department is currently within the basement and first floor of City Hall, and City Hall staff occupies the 2nd and 3rd floors of City Hall. The plan that is moving forward currently is to design and build a new police services building that would allow the police department to move into a larger space to better provide a better working environment and the space that they need for all that takes place in the police department. And then city staff would be able to move into the vacated space of the police department. That is estimated for city staff to move into the vacated space to last about 20 years before there would be another anticipated need for space at City Hall. The police facility, currently as designed schematically, is looking at about 55,000 square feet of space. I don't yet have an estimated length of time before space needs may arise from that particular facility. There is a request for funding to operate this police services facility within the referendum. What this funding would allow us to do is to hire a full-time building maintenance custodian for the police department. That position could also be shared throughout our building maintenance and custodian needs, but their primary duties would be to clean and maintain the police services building. We would also utilize a small portion of the funds to create a reserve so that whenever building mechanical systems needed to be repaired or replaced, money was available to do that, and also obviously to pay for the annual operating costs associated with a building such as utilities. As you can imagine, and I'm sure most of you experienced, increasing population has also placed increasing strain and pressure on our roadways and traffic within the city, and has increased a need for additional transit services. Increased funding in our transit service would allow us to invest in enhanced services on routes 65 and 75 here in the city. Those are routes, some of you may be familiar with Route 65, that does come through the northeast corner of the city, works its way down here through Terra Vesa and then across East Sherrill Parkway towards City Hall and Fitchburg Center for the employment centers there. And the Route 75 comes down Fish Hatchery Road and goes out McKee Road. Those 2 routes currently only operate during peak times, Monday through Friday, a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the afternoon. What we're hearing and finding is that that does not meet the needs, or at least the basic needs, of residents who rely on transit to get around our city and or to get to other places in the Madison metropolitan area. And it also is not currently meeting the need from some of our large employers as well, who are near or on those particular transit lines. The enhanced service would allow us to increase the frequency with which those buses operate. We'd be able to go to all-day service Monday through Friday, operating at approximately 60 minutes every pickup at the stops, and 90-minute service on evenings and weekends. One other big point that I'd like to make in regards to transit service that we currently do not have, because these 2 routes are not running significantly enough, is paratransit service. If we were to increase the services on Route 65 and 75, paratransit service also comes with those particular enhancements. And specifically, paratransit service would allow those who meet certain criteria with mobility, age, and other factors, who live within 3/4 of a mile of those routes would be able to utilize paratransit service. And that would allow a number of folks to potentially be able to access, better access services, not only here in the city of Fitchburg, but also elsewhere in the Madison metropolitan area, and would certainly allow much better connectivity for all riders, whether they're on the 65, 75, or paratransit, to our City Hall, Library, and Senior Center complex. On this slide, you can see that I'd like to point out that the city has been a careful steward of our budget, making the most out of the tax dollars that you all provide to us. Unfortunately, at this point, the needs of the community and the costs associated with addressing those needs, as well as maintaining and/or expanding the capacity of staff to meet the service expectations that many in our community have, we have not had the funding available to meet those expectations. The additional dollars are needed to hire public safety, other City Hall staff, address growing operating costs, and invest in transit. Costs have increased due to factors including the cost to recruit and retain our professional service-oriented staff, inflationary pressures on equipment, cost of supplies, materials, and services, as well as other operating expenses associated with maintaining the high level of service that our community appreciates. To address these challenges, the City of Fitchburg has placed a referendum on the ballot for November 5th. The referendum will ask Fitchburg voters whether or not they support a $3,593,000 increase in their property tax levy going forward to fund 5 sworn police positions, 6 firefighters, 3 city staff positions, police services building operating costs, improvements to public transit, and other city operating costs. We'll point out that this is a one-time, ongoing, permanent increase of roughly $3.6 million. It is not a referendum that adds an additional $3.6 million every year. It is a one-time increase that continues, if that makes sense.
It doesn't make sense.
So what it would...
It makes it, but it continues, but it doesn't continue.
So I'll try to say it a little more clearly. The tax levy would increase for 2025, $3.6 million. That increase would continue. What won't happen is what you typically or may see in school district referendum, where they will add 3.6 one year, an additional 3.6 the next year, and so on. They can do that for up to 4 years. This is a one-time, ongoing increase. Does that help?
It goes up and it stays at that level as opposed to going up and moving up at that level each year.
Correct, yes, exactly. Yep.
So if your assessment goes up, it's going to go up.
Well, we'll get to the question and answer. We can certainly talk through that. Absolutely. Happy to do that. Yep. So you may be asking why we need to go to referendum to fund these solutions. First and foremost, the referendum is not necessary due to a financial gap of the city. We're not trying to close a budget deficit right now. We have been, from a staff and common council perspective, trying to be very prudent with the financial resources that we have. Some evidence that recently confirms the financial stability and prudence of the decision-making was a recent evaluation we had done by Moody's Investors. Anytime the city borrows money, we get a rating from Moody's. We have previously been rated high AA, and in May we were rated AAA, which is their highest rating that they can provide for financial stability and confidence. We are one of only 6 local governments in the state of Wisconsin that Moody's has rated at their highest rating. So the city obviously is looking to do a referendum, again, not to close any financial gap, but to add much needed staff capacity, make the improvements in transit that I mentioned, operate its new police services building, and then have a small operating reserve that will be utilized largely to offset future existing personnel costs. So the city's ability to respond to changes in the demand for its services is restricted by state legislation. Specifically, state legislation limits the property tax levy increases primarily related to our percent increase in equalized value from net new construction. The allowable increases based on net new construction alone are insufficient to meet the growing needs of our community. In order to exceed state-imposed levy limits, the city must seek approval via a referendum. So you may be asking, I see a lot of growth that's happening in the city. Why is net new construction not enough to add the staff that you need at this particular time? Well, I'll use the example of the 2025 operating budget. The City of Fitchburg had a net new construction that we can utilize for the purposes of our 2025 property tax levy of right around 2.9%. That 2.9% equates to approximately $175 million in net new construction that happened in the City of Fitchburg in the last 12 months prior. That increase in our levy based on the net new construction allows us to levy an additional approximately $750,000 in property tax levy. A 1% cost of living adjustment for city staff equates to about $200,000. Our city staff has, right now, in the proposed mayor's budget for next year, has an increase of 2%. So you can see over half of that allowable increase is being utilized to provide a 2% cost of living adjustment. And then there have been other cost increases related to employee benefits, health insurance, retirement, as well as operating costs associated with road maintenance, supplies, pick whatever situation we're trying to fund. And much like what's happening in your own personal budgets, the costs have increased. And you can see how quickly that the net new construction and the increase in levy is utilized just to maintain existing services at the level in which they're currently provided. And one way to look at it is we need net new construction and we need growth in our city just to maintain the services that we're currently providing at the service levels that we're providing them. If we have no growth or elect not to grow, then we don't have the ability to increase our levy, which likely means we will be cutting staff and cutting services. So growth is needed just to maintain services. No growth equals cuts and reductions in services. A referendum that is passed allows the city to add staff capacity and enhance services. So why now? Well, as I mentioned, like many other communities, growing needs and expenses are outpacing our ability to pay for them. And in order to invest in staffing and fund growing operating costs necessary to maintain and or improve existing services, add staff capacity that's needed, additional funds are now required. So here's the referendum question you will see on the ballot on November 5th. I'm not going to read this. I'll pause here in a few minutes to allow you folks to read this particular question. And I will stress that we don't have any authority on how the question is written. The State Department of Revenue regulates how the referendum question has to be written. So as you take a read this question, we'll talk about what it means in the next few slides. Everyone had a chance to read it? Okay, I'll move on. Before I move on fully, we'll talk about where the question will be on the ballot. You can see the two ballots here that will be part of the City of Fitchburg ballots. The ballot on the left is for residents who do not reside in the Madison Metropolitan School District. You will find the ballot on the back side of the ballot. You'll need to flip it over and you'll see it in the upper left-hand corner of the ballot. For anyone who lives in the Madison School District, your ballot is on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, you'll find the question on the back side of that ballot. You'll need to flip it over and it will also be in the upper left-hand corner. but you will also see two other questions related to referenda the Madison Metropolitan School District has on the ballot. So if Fitchburg voters approve the referendum, the city would be able to institute the one-time permanent roughly $3.6 million increase to the property tax levy, beginning with property tax bills issued this December. This translates to a property tax impact of approximately $65.20 per $100,000 in assessed property value. The impact to a median Fitchburg single-family home currently valued at $457,800 is estimated to be $298.49 annually, or $24.87 per month. We do have a tax calculator on our website that does allow you to go in and enter in your assessed property value and then calculate what the tax rate or tax increase would be if this referendum were to pass based upon the assessed value of your home. As you can imagine, people in the city are the ones who provide the services, and as I mentioned, our ability to provide services and have the necessary capacity to meet the growing needs is limited by our staffing. The city turned to Baker Tilly to perform an operational and organizational review of City of Fitchburg staffing last year, and we also required our department heads to review their current and projected future workloads to identify what their staffing needs are as well. These efforts uncovered a need for more than 50 additional staff members over the next several years. We recognize it's not reasonable or feasible to ask for 50 additional staff members, and therefore we have prioritized those staff positions that were identified as having the greatest need to add as a part of this particular referendum. If approved, the city would have the necessary funding to address increased demands for public safety by hiring 5 police positions. Specifically, those police positions are the 3 police officers I had mentioned earlier, 1 police lieutenant, and 1 police sergeant. The referendum would also be utilized to hire 6 full-time firefighters. Additional staffing will allow the police department specifically to assign a full array of staff, including supervisory and command staff, to their overnight coverage hours, as well as to allow them to fully cover their peak service hours. And it ensures the city's ability to accept that federal grant valued at approximately $375,000. Hiring 6 additional firefighters in our fire department will help maintain and improve the department's ability to respond to emergencies in a timely manner. It will address staffing vacancies caused by decreasing volunteer and part-time availability, and it will assist in reducing overtime and over-reliance on our existing full-time firefighting staff, thereby improving our staffing levels and the reliability of those staffing levels. The addition of 6 full-time firefighters will allow us to staff approximately 75% of the annual hours that it takes to staff 2 fire engines that operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with full-time firefighters. Currently, less than 50% of those hours are covered by full-time firefighters. They are covered by part-time staff. In addition, funding from this referendum will enable the city to pay our part-time firefighters a base minimum hourly rate of $15 per hour, which again we hope will help retain existing staff and potentially attract new staff. And as I mentioned earlier, part-time firefighters are eligible to earn a higher hourly rate based upon training and certifications they obtain, as well as their length of service with the fire department. The city also would hire a communications director, a human resources generalist, and a finance manager as a result of this particular referendum, if approved. These 3 positions would allow our communication, transparency, and outreach with the community to improve through the communications director position. Our recruitment and retention efforts will be enhanced, as well as the day-to-day operations of our human resources department as they help assist in administering benefits and other related employment matters with the just over 200 full-time and part-time employees of the city. And management of the financial operations will also be enhanced with the finance manager. In particular, this position is probably or likely to be assigned to liaison with our Public Works and Engineering Department. Right now, our Public Works and Engineering staff is expected to complete a number of finance-related tasks related to their department that could be offloaded to somebody in the finance department if the capacity existed in the finance department. So by adding this position, one of the things we can do with it is shift some responsibilities from our Public Works team and engineering team and allow them to focus on the jobs that they've been hired to do and allow those finance-related tasks to be handled by somebody who's been hired to do finance-related tasks. In addition to those positions that I've mentioned, the city would also be able to fund the operating costs associated with the police services building, fund transit and paratransit system improvements, which again increases access between our residential areas, job centers, and city facilities. And it would also allow us to fund growing operating expenses with the other operating category there of approximately $475,000. If the referendum is rejected by a majority of voters on November 5th, the City of Fitchburg will have to make difficult decisions on how best to address the growing needs for public safety, parks maintenance, highway maintenance, and other city services, as well as growing challenges with recruitment and retention. The result of a no referendum would result in a maintenance of current funding for all city services and operations, and as we talked about earlier, no growth, growth in the city allows us to maintain our existing operations. No growth does not allow for anything other than a cut or reduction in staffing and services, and a referendum allows us to continue to add capacity and provide high-quality services to our residents. Without the additional funding, the additional staff will not be hired as outlined. The upcoming, there are some additional information sessions that are upcoming in case anybody would like to attend another one of these, or if you have neighbors or friends who weren't able to attend today. There is one next Monday night, October 21st at 6 p.m. That'll be hosted at the Four Winds Farm at 5783 Adams Road in South Fitchburg. And there is another virtual session that will be held October 28th at 6 p.m. All the sessions that we've hosted to date, which includes, with these two includes a total of 7 sessions, 4 in person, 3 virtual, have all been recorded. They are all available on the city's website for viewing on demand. So in summary, the City of Fitchburg will ask voters whether or not they support a nearly $3.6 million increase in the property tax levy going forward to fund 5 police positions, which would allow the city to accept the $375,000 in grant funding for the 3 police officers, increase our community-oriented policing efforts through additional neighborhood-based officers, and enhance our coverage and supervisory coverage in particular during peak hours. 6 firefighters would allow the city to reduce its dependency on part-time firefighters, as well as its dependency on overtime for existing career firefighting staff. It would allow us to have approximately 75% of the annual engine hours covered by our full-time staff versus relying on our part-time staff for the majority of that coverage. And it would allow the city to pay its part-time firefighters a base wage of $15 per hour. The 3 non-public safety positions that I mentioned, the communications director, the human resources generalist, and the finance manager, again, would allow the city to improve its communications, transparency, and outreach with residents, help recruit and retain staff, and provide capacity for our day-to-day human resources functions, and would allow our engineers and public works staff to spend more time on infrastructure projects and public works projects versus finance-related functions. The ongoing police department facility costs would allow us to hire a building maintenance and custodian person to serve as a primary responsibility for the police services building, fund the operational costs, the utilities, and annual operating expenses, and it would allow us to build a modest reserve for future building and mechanical systems replacement whenever those become necessary. Improvements to the transit and paratransit system would allow enhancements, as I've discussed previously, to routes 65 and 75, which would move from weekday peak hour service only to day, weekend, and evening services. And then finally, the other city operating costs, those are going to be reserved for future personnel cost increases for staff that is already on the city. As I mentioned earlier, a 1% cost of living adjustment costs about $200,000 citywide. So you can see a less than 3% pay increase or cost of living adjustment would more than utilize the $475,000. And again, as mentioned earlier, the tax impact of this referendum is approximately $65.20 per $100,000 in assessed value, and the impact to the median Fitchburg home valued at $457,800 is estimated to be $298.49 annually, or $24.87 per month. And then you can see in this particular pie chart, the dollars in this referendum, about 2/3 of it would be spent on public safety costs, 13% on operating costs, and 11% on non-public safety, those three positions that I had mentioned, and 10% would be utilized for transit enhancements and improvements. So I please encourage everyone to head to the polls on Tuesday, November 5th to vote on this referendum question, or certainly if you have choose to vote absentee, please do so. In-person absentee voting will begin on October 22nd at City Hall. Our polling locations on November 5th will be open from 7 a.m. and will close at 8 p.m. And you are, as a Wisconsin voter, required to show an acceptable photo ID in order to vote. Additional voting information, including hours, again for in-person absentee voting, or at where polling locations are, or to request an absentee ballot, can be found on the city's website or myvote.wi.gov. This concludes my presentation. Before we move on to questions, I'll ask the elected officials who are here if there's anything that you would like to add that I may not have covered at all.
Can you explain the levy limit, how it changed from the last 10 years? The original formula?
So are you talking about so the levy limit and how it's changed over the last 10 years? Are you talking about with the state law change?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So the question is the levy limit changed? So that was probably passed about 10 years ago, 12 years ago at this point in time by the state legislature that does restrict the city's ability to increase property taxes without factoring in its change for net new construction. So we had talked a bit about that and how that works, that every year the Department of Revenue indicates to us what they believe our net new construction has changed from year to year, and that net new construction is then used to determine whether or not the levy can be increased and by how much. Does that get to where you're heading with that, or is there something more you want to go with? I'm not sure I'm totally tracking the question clearly. Yeah, I'm not tracking the question, sorry.
Okay. So know that before 2013, the levy limit formula was, they have a base, a percentage, it was 2 or 3% to cover inflation. And then it had the net new construction. It was an additional, percentage. That one was used to cover, the growth or expenses for the growth that this municipality had. In 2013, it was removed, that base, the 3%. So municipalities, only we have right now is the net new construction percentage that we need to use that amount that, as Chad mentioned before, for this year, for the 2025 budget, is only $750,000 for us. That only allow us to cover existence cost. It doesn't allow us to hire more police officer, firefighter. We cannot do that because we need that money. We use it to cover expenses because due to the inflationary cost. So that won't happen in the last 10 years. That is affecting most of the municipality that we are in this situation.
Thank you, Mayor. So with questions, we can go ahead and start that. And how we'll do it is just like to raise your hand if you have a question. You can ask one question to start, and then once we get all the way through the room and everybody's had a chance to ask one question, we can go back to those who may have more than one question. So with that in mind, it looks like we've got a question here. Go ahead.
By exceeding the expenditure restraint limit, which is set by the state, do we forfeit the grant or reward that the state gives us for staying within the expenditure restraint, which I believe is about $500,000?
Yeah, I'll take that back. So the expenditure restraint program is a program that the state has that says if we don't increase our spending by certain thresholds, they will give us additional aid. The City Council has historically, in the vast majority of cases, passed budgets that allow the city to qualify for the expenditure restraint program. That funding does vary based upon the number of municipalities qualifying for it, so there is a little bit of fluctuation to it. But generally speaking, it can range from around $500,000 to $400,000. And in some cases, it could be a little more if there are more municipalities not qualifying for it. So it's generally a set pool of money that is spread across the municipalities that qualify for it. If this referendum passes, it will not affect our ability to continue to qualify for expenditure restraint program in the 2026, in the 2025 budget, where this would first hit the levy.
We get the $500,000 in 2025 or not in 2025?
We would get it. We will qualify. Yes.
All right, I don't think I might come. Do we have a planning association? Does Fitchburg have a planning committee that decides, how we talk about this rapid growth, and it seems to all be centered on multifamily housing units that seem to be kind of capped at what they can be taxed. And I feel, kind of based on the presentation, that the homeowners are the ones who are picking up the slack. And I was just curious, if we're concerned about such rapidity in our growth, why so many multiple housing units and maybe not cut back on that and have more single-family homes to make growth at a more manageable rate? Because it's not just police and firefighters, it's our library, it's water, sewer, it's healthcare, it's, our schools, everything is impacted by this high rate of growth. So I'm just curious about that.
So I'll try to paraphrase your question. Does the city have a planning committee, if you will? Or how does the city plan for its growth, I think is kind of where the question is at, right? And how does multifamily growth impact the cost of city services in relation to single family growth? Is that kind of where you're at? Okay. So the city has a comprehensive land use plan that was most recently updated in 2019 that guides where and how the city will grow. In some regards, the market also dictates or determines how and where the city will grow based upon land that is available, willing land sellers who wish to develop, as well as what the developer is able to bring through the financing that they have available to make that project come in. The city, as well as the metropolitan region, has a housing shortage right now as well, which is also contributing to the lack of supply of housing, which then is increasing the tax assessed values that you are all seeing on your properties. We are required by state law to be assessing properties within certain percentages of fair market value. And with low supply, fair market value has increased significantly over the last several years. And when you look at multifamily versus single family, traditionally speaking, multifamily or higher density development generally would have a lower impact on city services when you're talking about infrastructure. More people can live in a smaller area, therefore less roads, sewer utilities are needed, which then means less to maintain from a snow plowing, road maintenance, resurfacing statement. Also contributes to lower sprawl as well. And the city currently has, the last several years, approved roughly on average 115 to 125 single-family housing permits or duplex permits. And depending on where and when an apartment building or multifamily building is proposed, that may range in any given year, depending on the number of buildings, to say 200 to 400 units. The city certainly strives to have the best balance that it can in its housing situation. And again, the market and available land does sometimes dictate where we are allowed to grow. We have two neighborhoods that have a lot of single-family homes that are being built right now. Terra Vesa, just down the road here, and then Highfield Reserve up off of Fish Hatchery and Nobel. You did also mention that there seems to be some cap on what multifamily housing properties can be assessed or taxed at, and that's not the case. They are also required to be assessed at fair market value, or there are a couple other ways by statute that the assessor may utilize to assess those properties. And they are being assessed at the same rate and in proximity to fair market value as all of our single family and our commercial properties are. So it's clear that the city and its assessing department strives to make sure that the assessments are fair and equitable across all of the parcels within the city. So we're charged with that by statute to ensure that they're fair and equitable across the city, and that one particular type of development or property is not paying more than another type. It is all based upon the value of that property.
And then you have, but with multiple family units, you have that higher population density that requires more services as opposed to maybe a slow growth. So I'm just trying to work this out because I'm new to this. But it just seems like in the past 2-3 years, all I see are high density, multiple family units going up everywhere. Sure. And I know that a lot of younger people, it's right about they want single-family homes, and they can't find them, and they're being priced out, and they don't want to be in multiple family units. Sure. But it seems like there's nothing else being provided at this point. So I'm just kind of concerned about that.
Yeah, fair concern. Again, to kind of recap, conversation about, the type of housing units, multifamily versus single family, and the numbers of those. And when we talk about housing crisis, Dane County Housing Authority just put out a study that indicated there's a need for 7,000 additional housing units per year in Dane County between now and 2030 in order to meet existing demand as well as anticipated demand from population growth in the Dane County metropolitan area. That study indicated that the city of Fitchburg alone needs, if I recall correctly, to add approximately 500 housing units a year is what is allocated for this portion of the 7,000 units to meet that demand. The only way, well, I shouldn't say the only way, one of the ways in which to potentially try to make houses more attainable is, again, to increase that supply, right? There has to be more houses available, and ideally the supply also then at least tries to hold prices flat, if potentially not lowering them at least a little bit. Because you're right, right now it is significant lift for a lot of people to be able to get into an ownership situation with either a single-family house or a townhome. Throughout the Madison metropolitan area, at least a new construction on a townhome or a house is probably going to cost $400,000, and that's difficult for a lot of people, particularly young people, to be able to afford. So I appreciate that you're paying attention to the housing situation, and until that supply is up, I don't see it changing, because it seems as though people are continuing to move to this area. Next question. Yeah.
I don't need that.
Okay.
I can talk about it. Had the City of Fitchburg ever considered a renter's tax rather than putting all this on the homeowners? I've lived in here for 55 years in Fitchburg. And I originally moved to Fitchburg because it was the most economical city, or at that time it wasn't a city,
Sure.
to live in. I mean, it's escalating and escalating. Right now, you're forcing me out of my house. I mean, I invested money, I use all my investments, what I get off of that in a year pays my taxes. I don't get to travel all over the United States or anything like that. And I feel that Fitchburg has an overabundance of renters in this area, right here, right around us here, that what to consider a renter's tax. If you want an example, my son-in-law and my daughter lived in Los Altos, California, and they had a renter's tax that they paid. So I just wanted to make that as a suggestion. And one other thing, as far as the police and all this stuff goes, buildings and stuff like that, you got two ideal locations. You got two precincts you could have. One here at this fire station, and one on the fire station on the other side of Verona Road. Build one to them and have a precinct. The fire department is good access. You can have office onto the building. Officers that have less travel, you be closer to your problems, take care of it, be a lot simpler to building. A building centrally located, running up and down Fitchburg Road 90 miles an hour, or going across Side Road, Lacey Road, whatever. I mean, I just think that would be something that the city ought to look into, having precincts instead of a separate building. If you want, you're big enough now, have precincts. You have fire departments that are precincts. Have the police department the same way.
So to recap, renter's tax, I'll start with that one. And first and foremost, I do understand and appreciate your comments about the taxing situation. We all know that property taxes have increased over the last several years. There's a variety of factors that have contributed to those tax increases. I will point out that the City of Fitchburg share of your property tax bill, which is roughly 30-ish% of your tax bill, has generally been flat the last four or five tax years based upon the average single-family house. There have been school referendum that have passed in the Verona School District and Oregon School District, which obviously have contributed to the property tax bill increasing. Sure, right. And they've got one on the agenda as well. We understand all that, and Dane County had a 17% tax increase last year. We understand. We understand. We get it. We know that that's an impact for people, and that's certainly a consideration as they're looking at whether or not or how they want to vote for this particular referendum. Completely understand that. The renter's tax, I don't believe that that's a legal option in the state of Wisconsin. As part of this process, we looked at ways to potentially increase revenue in the city that would allow us not to go to referendum, and our public finance advisors did not offer that as an option. So I don't believe that that's an option here in the state of Wisconsin. I'm not aware of a municipality that does it. When we look at our renters, they are, in effect, contributing property taxes. And I'll explain how that is. The buildings with which they live in are assessed and have to pay property taxes. On average, a building that's gone up down the street, that might have 150 units in it, probably costs $30 million to construct. I'm not sure what the exact fair market value of that building might be, but the average unit is valued in the city of Fitchburg at about $120,000 per unit. So if you utilize that as a rough way to kind of calculate what the tax burden is for that particular building, you can kind of look at the number of units they have, multiply that by 120,000, and that's what they're contributing in property taxes through, obviously, the rent that they pay. That's where a portion of their rent is obviously going to pay the property taxes for that particular building. And when you look at public safety response, it's a little more complicated in so much as fire departments, generally speaking, are responding from a central location or set location. Fire station here, fire station over by McKee and Seminole Highway. Where police is generally out in the community already, they don't necessarily respond from a station unless they happen to be back there for a particular reason, whether they were completing some reports, packaging evidence, whatever the case may be, and now they're having to head out from the police station out to a call. But generally speaking, those officers are deployed throughout the city during their shift, so they are within their neighborhoods or districts, and they're available to respond in a timely fashion and not coming from a central location and going here, there, and everywhere. So during that space needs, the city did consider precincts, and at that time it was determined that precincts weren't an appropriate model to be utilized based upon where the city was at with its growth, and that has not changed at this point in time. And the lot where the fire station is near McKee and Seminole is, there's no more space there to add on at this point in time, so there wouldn't really be an option to even add that. And when you look at 55,000 square feet being necessary for the police department, it would be nearly impossible to get that level of square footage even amongst the two stations. There's just not room to add 25,000 square feet at each of those facilities. So I appreciate the suggestion, but it's just not, it's not a viable option in this situation. So there's about 65, 67 employees that work out of the police department. 55 of those are sworn staff who are responding to calls for service or otherwise involved in law enforcement related tasks or policing tasks. And then they have the support staff, dispatchers, records custodians, and those sorts of things. So there's a large number of employees that work out of that building.
So you see my position as retired. In my financial situation, I have to vote no. I don't want my taxes to go up anymore than what it does.
I respect that. Yep, absolutely. Next question.
I don't need that.
Okay.
What happens to all the fees that you charge for the new construction?
So the fees that are charged for construction, where does that go? That goes to the general fund. And the general fund is used to provide services to the city. So that money, whatever that may be in any given year, based upon building permit fees or application fees associated with developments, impact fees in some situations, will go to the general fund, used to pay for your public safety people, your city staff, parks maintenance. That's where that goes. There are some fees that are isolated. When new developments come, they are charged like a park impact fee. That is isolated for parks amenities that are new. State law does not allow us to use those impact fees for existing parks to maintain or operate those. That is one of the significant limitations of the state legislature as it currently is, because we do feel that new development, if those park impact fees were able to be utilized for things like parks maintenance operations, could be another way in which the city would be able to ease its dependency on property tax levy to provide those sorts of services. So in a lot of situations, the city is restricted by state law on how it can spend its funds. Next question. Do you want the microphone or no?
Sure.
All right, I finally got a taker.
I have a question about the transit and paratransit fees. I really haven't heard of any transit studies or needs from the public about increasing the service for the 65 and the 75 from peak hour or rush hour to all-day service. So I guess I'm wondering where that need is arising from. And also, too, with the Route 75, unless I'm mistaken, Epic funded quite a large share of that. Is that still the case? Has that changed? Because that used to be the case. And I know it runs through Fitchburg, and you have to pay the portion that touches Fitchburg, but typically I thought Epic was funding the lion's share of that. So those are my questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't remember the specific year in which there was a transit study. Did you get neither of the elected officials, or was it 16 or 17, that led to the rideshare program that was implemented? Yeah, so there was a study that led to a rideshare program that was implemented on a pilot basis for a year. Yeah, I don't remember which specific year that happened, but ultimately the city did attempt to implement a rideshare program as a way to enhance its transit services without relying on metro buses to do that. And the provider that was selected and some logistical issues led to poor reliability and poor service, and the pilot was not continued after that year. So we've continued to have this gap in how we best try to get people within the city. We can get people, generally speaking, who live on transit or near transit lines into the city of Madison. But where we struggle is to get somebody from here to City Hall or the Senior Center or library, or from here to, say, Target or Hy-Vee to be able to do some shopping, and vice versa. We can't get people from Northwest Fitchburg to the city center or over to here. In regards to Route 75, you are correct. Epic still does pay a portion of that route. I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but you are also correct in that Fitchburg is responsible to pay a portion of that route for the service it gets within the city of Fitchburg. And the city of Verona also contributes to Route 75 for the services that they get within the city of Verona. So how Metro Transit works is we get billed for the hours of service and runs that are made. So that within the city here. So that's how the distribution is made. Sure. Oh, well, then you know probably better than I do. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So, Bill, you want to add something?
I guess I want to know: is there really? I mean, with the 65 and the 75, is there, especially the 65, is there really that much of a demand that people really are asking for all-day service and weekend service and evening service?
So I personally have had conversations with at least one large employer, two large employers in our community who have shift-based employment opportunities, who have felt that transit enhancements would potentially improve the pool of candidates with which they could potentially recruit. Right now, anybody that does not have access to a car or reliable transportation is not able to work a shift-based position at those companies because they can't get there. So enhanced transit could be, one of the benefits of that could be to allow a wider employment net to be cast by some of our employers, particularly those with shift-based duties. When you look at our senior center in particular, they do have county funding that allows them to pick up senior center residents or users to come for the noontime meal program. But they don't have any transportation available for any of the other programming that the senior center offers either before or after the lunch hour. The transportation that is partially funded by the county only allows people to get there in time for the meal and then takes them back home immediately following the meal. So I have heard repeatedly from our senior center director as well as many members of the Commission on Aging Well that enhanced transit would provide more access to the senior center specifically. And with the improvements in 65 and 75, and in particular the paratransit service that comes with that, 3/4 of a mile on either side of the route, would provide a significant opportunity for those seniors who are wishing to get to the senior center. It would give them an opportunity to get there at times outside of the lunch hour.
And Metro can provide that additional service, because I know sometimes that's been an issue.
Sure.
You want the service, but you don't have the buses.
Yeah, the follow-up question was, can Metro provide that service? Yes, we've been told they can. We've been in conversation with them to determine, one, what the estimated cost of the improvements would be, and as to whether or not they can provide that service. So they have provided the cost estimate that you're seeing there with the approximately $350,000 transit segment there, and they have indicated that they do have the ability to provide that service.
Thank you.
Yep. Is there something you wanted to add, Alder Judge, sir? Good. There you go.
Yeah, you touched on it then just now. I was going to talk about the senior center. If you go to the YouTube channel for the City of Fitchburg or our Fact TV channel, you can pull up any Commission on Aging well meeting, and I guarantee you transportation will be a topic of discussion. It has been for years. So a couple of additional points. Chad, you implied but didn't explicitly state that the extension of the 65 and 75 would actually bring the endpoints of those two to the same place. So the 65 right now terminates down by the library. That would actually extend up to Triverton Pike, just south of Key Road, which is where the 75 would be. So you could take the 75, transfer at that point, and then come down to City Hall. So that's an important gap that would be filled. And I guess another thing to point out here is that the Wisconsin DOT maintains a map of non-drivers throughout the state. And if you just Google for Wisconsin DOT non-driver map, you'll find it. And you can zoom in on Fitchburg and you'll see that 40% of Fitchburg residents don't drive. So public transit right now, you know, maybe part of the reason you've not heard of any demand is because the transit, you know, I mean, it doesn't exist to the extent that people can actually get around easily. And if we provide that, you know, there's a bit of a build it and they will come aspect to this. Right now, people aren't clamoring for transit because they don't know how to, right? I mean, you can ask your elected officials. We can only do so much with limited funding. And this is an opportunity for us to expand transit and really, you know, 2 out of 5 citizens don't drive a car. And I think this is an important step towards equity.
Thank you, Alder Jetson. I should add, too, that just recently we had a map put together that would visualize where the paratransit service would cover. When you look at the routes and the 3/4 of a mile on each side of the route, I did not have the opportunity to get that into this presentation to help visualize it, but we will look to add it to our website in the referendum section so folks can see what that map looks like. And really, when you visualize that paratransit coverage in particular, it covers a fair portion of our developed area here in the city. Next question? Yeah.
I'll take the mic only because I'm assuming it's needed for the
yeah,
webcast.
Appreciate that. Okay, I'll get him next. Thank you, Gabriel.
So I'm a resident of Fitchburg, bought our house in 2016. Our taxes have gone up, or our assessed value has gone up basically every year since then. But my question, and I have a handful, but my question is, in regards to the firefighter positions, are you staffing another rig? Are you staffing another station or an apparatus, as if you're just changing who's on the truck, you're not going to affect the response times? So how does that affect, what's the correlation?
So, no, we are not adding an apparatus to the fire department that will be staffing each and every day. We have, I think it takes roughly 2,500 hours a year to staff the 2 engines with 4 firefighters, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of the call response time lag will not be avoided, largely because there's still 2 engines to respond. And if they're on a call, there's still going to be a need for mutual aid. The main component is to try to improve the reliability of the staffing model, because right now, less than 50% of those 2,500 hours annually are covered by full-time career staff. We rely heavily, as you can see based on that number, on part-time staff. The Common Council has added fire positions over the last several budgets, which has improved that ratio. Actually, we were trending closer to 25% of the hours were being covered annually by our full-time career staff, and 75% was being covered by part-time staff just a few years ago. So what that will allow us to do, obviously, is also reduce the amount of overtime that we're expecting out of our career staff to cover those 2,500 annual hours. And you can imagine what that does to the career staff when they're expected to work exorbitant amounts of overtime. Gone from their families extended periods of time, fatigue sets in, burnout sets in, and then we have a turnover issue that starts to creep up. So we certainly need to address that, and you bring up a fair point that in certain situations, without adding an additional rig, we are not going to improve the response times, but ideally we will improve the reliability of the staffing model. And what you can see is happening is our part-time staff has declined considerably over the years. This started out as a township, in the early 70s when our fire department began, and it was strictly volunteer, 100% volunteer. And over time, full-time staff has been added, but we have had heavy reliance on volunteers and our part-time. We've transitioned to more of a part-time model versus a volunteer model. And we will still continue to have a need for part-time firefighters for the foreseeable future. It'll be quite some time, if ever, that we don't have a need for part-time firefighters. And that does serve as a valuable recruitment tool for us as well, in that gives us an opportunity to get to know somebody and their suitability for our fire department's culture and their skill set as a part-time employee before potentially moving them into a full-time role. So there's definitely value there in that. But we definitely need to get more full-time staff on to, again, reduce the over-reliance on existing staff for overtime and improve that reliability of coverage.
And I believe you guys had a recruitment for part-time firefighters this year. Whatever happened with that?
No one has been hired so far. I had just had a conversation with the fire chief a couple of weeks ago on that. I think he's hoping to hire a couple of positions out of that recruitment. So that will, provide a couple more part-time firefighters. Again, in many situations, they have a full-time job elsewhere, so that limits their availability. Some of the younger folks who are looking to get into fire service may have a bit more availability. But I think we typically have about, on any given year, about 20 active part-time firefighters who are taking any number of hours. And there's a percentage of those 20 who are taking a lot of hours, and a percentage of those who aren't taking, probably taking less than the average. And that's just the way it goes. Again, their commitments outside of the fire service may be different. So we will continue to recruit for part-time firefighters, even if this referendum is passed and 6 full-time firefighters are added. There will still be additional needs to grow our fire department to ensure that they have the appropriate number of staff, and in particular command staff on shift and those sorts of things. So this is, just another step in our journey as we've, become a city of 35,000. Does that answer your question? JR, I'll got you here in a second. Let me get the mic.
Don't need that.
Okay.
I'll speak loud now.
All right.
I've got a police fire background. I believe in the need for the police and fire positions and all of that. I understand that. A few years ago in the budget process, it was looking like they were going to get some firefighters, but then they, in the amendment process, dropped those positions, did bicycle shoulders on Wayland Road instead. I don't agree with that, but it happened. But this year, it's bad for the taxpayers of Fitchburg because you're funding a new hub or teen center. You want money for the police department, and now you want money for this referendum. And it's all going to increase your taxes. The thing with the police department is there's $5 million set set aside for green energy, which is a want, it's not a need. And if you think that 300 for this referendum at 3.6 million is going to hurt you, just think what that 5 million on green energy is going to cost you. It's going to be more than 300, so you're looking at over $700 increase. If you drop that 5 million for green energy, you'd have money, you wouldn't need this referendum. Would you?
So I'll answer your questions here. So I'll start with the last one. If those $5 million were not spent on sustainability enhancements to the police facility, we would have our money for the referendum. No, that's not an accurate statement, and here's why. It's different buckets. The money for the police services building is coming out of borrowing, capital costs. Those are one-time costs that the city repays. The money that's being asked for in this referendum is for the operating budget. The operating budget funds your day-to-day services. That's what pays for the people who serve you. That's what pays for the materials, and in some cases the equipment that the city uses to provide its services. So the operating budget is an ongoing expense that happens every single year, and it's an entirely different bucket of money than the borrowing that is being utilized for a large capital project like the police facility. Your other statement about the increase in taxes, you are correct that obviously a large borrowing project like the police facility will also have a tax impact. What that is right now, we don't know, and largely because we ultimately don't yet know the cost of the police facility. That's in the design phase. We'll look to have another cost estimate. There'll probably be 2 more cost estimates done before it goes out to bid later next year. A portion of the cost of that police facility has already been borrowed, about $8 million, or about 20% of the potential estimated cost. You will see the cost of that borrowing in your next tax bill. That is already part of the mayor's proposed operating budget that will be considered for approval in November. Right now, the mayor's proposed operating budget for 2025 equates to approximately $85 increase on the average single-family home, which is, again, $457,000.
Per month?
No, per year. So the reason we can't tell you how much the police facility will ultimately cost you is because, 1, we don't know the cost. 2, we don't know the rate at which we'll be borrowing the money. Our AAA bond rating will certainly help that. We did, in this first round of borrowing that was done, our public finance advisors estimated we were saving about $300,000 in interest costs because of the AAA bond rating on that. The City Common Council is considering impact fee that could be utilized to offset the cost of the police facility that would be charged to new developments. We are already doing that related to these 2 fire stations, one of which you're in today. We do have an impact fee that is being charged to all new projects. They have to pay that as part of their fees to the city. I think it's right around $700 is what we are able to charge for that particular impact. That money is being used to reduce. That goes to the city, but it's used specifically to pay down the debt for the 2 fire stations. The developers pay that fee, absolutely. So whenever you see a new project come in, they're paying that impact fee. Single family house, multifamily project, whatever the case may be, they're paying that impact fee. So a portion of the police department could be offset by a new impact fee that could be charged to future development projects. And there could be some cash on hand that's utilized from the city's rainy day fund that could also be used to reduce the amount that's borrowed. So that's why we can't give you a definitive answer at this point in time as to what the cost specifically will be, but there will certainly be a cost to that as well. Did you have a third one in there that I missed?
Yeah, the hub on the teen center. Can you explain?
Yeah, I can cover that. So the hub project is up on Traceway Drive, just off of Fish Hatchery Road. That is a project that will have approximately 2,000 square foot community center building, basketball, multi-use recreational court, playground, an outdoor gathering area, and a bicycle, they call it a pump track, some hills and jumps and things like that. That project is being paid exclusively for through fees that developers have paid. Those are called fee in lieu of parkland dedication. Anytime a development comes forward, whether it's a multifamily project or a single-family neighborhood, the city expects that there is going to be some contribution to its park system, either in the fee of parkland that will be dedicated to the city, or fee, or AKA money, in lieu of that dedication. We charge $4,300 per apartment unit in fee of lieu of dedication. That is notably higher than any other municipality, at least as of the last survey that we had done several years ago. And there is also that park impact fee that is charged as well. Those fees are what was used to pay for the entirety of the capital costs associated with that particular project. The Common Council has also set aside operating funds in its existing budget that have already been paid for, or already been set aside to pay for the ongoing operating costs of that facility. That would include a full-time building maintenance and custodian position that would be responsible for that building, and also share their time between the Public Works Maintenance Facility on Fish Hatchery Road. That building has never had a dedicated maintenance and custodian person, and we have expected our streets and parks maintenance staff to clean and maintain that building, in addition to maintaining our streets and park system. So the addition of this position will help free up some additional time and capacity in our streets and maintenance department for that. In regards to the teen center, that is currently a project that has been proposed in our capital improvement plan. The city has intended to have a 3-phase feasibility study to determine if and or when to move forward with the teen center. It's currently in phase 2. The phase 2 feasibility study is wrapping up. There is anticipated to be a presentation on that at the November Committee of the Whole meeting, which is the 20th of November at 7 p.m. That will help provide some additional information to the Common Council as to what next steps they may wish to take on that particular project. Anything else you guys want to add on any of those? No? Okay. Did I get all the questions?
You did.
Okay.
It'd just be nice for the city to drop the $5 million and save the taxpayers some money for the green energy.
Can you explain the credit that we're getting?
So I can cover some of that. So the sustainability improvements are obviously, we recognize there's a cost to those. One of the things that we hope to also do, in addition to perhaps solar and geothermal with that building, is use that money to enhance the building envelope itself. Do better insulation, do better insulated windows, also look at the installation of LED fixtures and low-flow plumbing fixtures with that money, all in an effort to ideally reduce the operating costs on that building each year through the utility side of things. And the federal government is currently offering incentives for the installation of improvements. I believe the latest estimate that I've heard just on the geothermal system is we would get, I think, over 30% of the cost of that system back in incentives from the federal government. So there are some incentives that the city would intend to take that would ideally reduce the impact of those costs and improvements.
From what I've seen, Madison's done some things toward green energy that hasn't panned out the way it's supposed to. They remodeled Station 1 and went to compact fluorescence. That's supposed to last a long time. And they're expensive. They won't last like they were touted. And it costs them more money than it. They've done better off with the old ones. They've also done some other things for environmentally friendly geothermal stuff that hasn't panned out, hasn't been touted. I worry about green energy and what they say and what really happens isn't necessarily
Can you explain
the same
that
thing.
fire station are really using green energy?
Yeah, we do have solar on these, on our fire stations, and we have solar on Public Works facilities, City Hall, library, geothermals at the library as well. All of those do have a reduced energy cost for the city. You know, I don't have those figures off the top of my head. Of course, there was an investment in those systems initially, and it does take time to pay that back. You know, there's no doubt about that. But it is reducing costs to the city, and then of course there's the environmental benefits of the use of those items as well.
I also worry about the end run when you got to get rid of them, because the hazardous waste and what it's going to cost the city then, which is the unknown.
Next questions? Yeah. You bet.
I arrived a couple minutes late, so I'm sorry if I missed this in your presentation. I feel like I have a good sense of how the property tax levies from new construction is used to invest back in the city of Fitchburg. But I'm wondering, for those majority of homes who are existing homes who have seen their valuations and assessments go up considerably in the past couple of years, how is that? Most times those valuations are outpacing inflation. How is that money reinvested back into projects like this?
Yeah, sure. So when you look at assessments, the city has revalued properties in 2022 and 2024, most recently. And in both of those situations, in effect, that was a 2-year cycle, right? 2022, I think the previous revaluation had been 2020 or 2019. So when those values were done, that was also, for lack of a better way of saying it, catch up, right? The property values had increased the previous 2 or 3 years, and then obviously increased in 2023, in which the assessments did not change, and then they were changed again in 2024 to reflect fair market values. On average, in both 2022 and 2024, those assessments citywide increased roughly 20%. But what you didn't see is a 20% increase in the city portion of your tax bill. What the city council does, and how typically these situations work, is the tax rate is lowered because of the increase in value of the city. So when you look at the city portion of your tax bill the last 4 years, if you're looking at an average house, it ranged right around $2,500 a year, give or take $100 for the last 4 or 5 years. So what that means is the city did not collect any additional revenue from the increase in assessments because the tax rate went down and further spread the whole property tax levy out amongst all of the properties. So, so the short answer is while your home value went up, we didn't collect any more in taxes as a direct result of your home value going up. We collected any difference in taxes related to what the levy limit could be increased, which is based on our net new construction. Yeah. Or if you want me to repeat your question, I can too, that's fine. Yeah.
I'm just curious if you could go over exactly what the heck net new construction value is versus why don't we, if it's new construction, it's new construction, why are we playing games with net new construction? Are we giving companies incentives and not taxing them for 5-6 years? What does net new construction mean?
Sure, so that is a term that is from the Department of Revenue. And net new construction is the change in the value of city properties year over year. So in some situations, maybe there's a building torn down, maybe a redevelopment project. So if the value in that redevelopment project was, let's just say, $1 million of that property that was torn down, $1 million comes off our equalized value. If that project, the redevelopment project, was $10 million, the net new increase would be $9 million. That's where the net comes in, because there are situations where there is a decline in certain properties because maybe they were torn down, the value has declined for whatever reason. So that's where you get the net new, because there could be those situations where other parcels declined in value. And when you talk about incentives for projects, we only do incentives in tax increment districts. That's the only mechanism that is available for the city to potentially incent a commercial project that might bring jobs to the city, for instance. And what happens in those situations is whatever the value of that parcel is before that parcel was built on, let's just say, if it's we'll just pick Uptown here down at the Lacey Road Highway 14 interchange, a vacant lot there. If the city were to incent a tech company to come in that says they're going to bring 100 jobs, and those jobs are going to pay on average, $90,000 a year, and that project is going to cost $150 million to build, the city might, depending on the situation, use the tax increment district to incent that project to come to the city, because it would obviously bring jobs and it would increase our tax base.
In theory.
It will increase the tax base, regardless. Of course, provided it gets built. But the way we do our incentives, we do it pay as you go, which means the project has to be built and it has to generate a certain tax valuation in order to generate the money that is then paid back to the developer. And we typically limit our contribution to no more than 10% of the project, and we typically pay that back over 15 years. And there are certain situations in which there have been projects that have been built that the city has incented that have not met their valuation thresholds, and therefore their payment is reduced or not made at all because they haven't made those valuation thresholds. So the city does take that incentive work very seriously, and we do not get into risky situations where we're doing any sort of upfront, here's $10 million, come build your project, and then it either doesn't get built or it doesn't get built to what was purported to be. And when you look at a tax increment district, how they work is when they're created, the tax value of that district remains on the tax levy. Anything that's built new in that district, the new tax revenue initially does not come on to the city's tax levy. It is used to reinvest within that district, build roads, infrastructure, perhaps incent other development projects, those sorts of things. When a tax increment district closes, all of that money then comes back and is spread across the general levy. We've seen two very large TID districts close in the last few years. One that was in the Verona Road corridor and McKee Road that was used to help do Target, Hy-Vee, that general vicinity. And then a second one that ran kind of basically through the Promega campus out here to Uptown. Both of those have been very successful TIDs that significantly lowered the tax rate once they fully came onto the tax levy, and also created an excess increment situation that allowed the city to use one-time funding that could be used for things like teen center feasibility studies, roadway projects of a one-time nature, equipment costs, those sorts of things. So the city does take its responsibility very seriously on how those work. Yeah. Microphone? No, you didn't want microphone, did you?
I have a question about the grant for the police department.
Yeah.
Grants don't last forever.
Correct.
How long does the grant last for, and what is going to happen to those 3 positions that are funded by that grant?
Yeah. So the question is, how long does the grant last, and what would happen to the 3 police officers that would be hired on that grant? The funding lasts for 3 years, and again, the total funding would cover about 1/3 of the cost of those police officers for 3 years, and the grant would require the city to keep those police officers for an additional year after the grant funding expires. The money in this referendum is enough to ensure that those 3 police officers would be continued after the grant expires. So we would set aside the money, a portion of the money that is in this referendum, to fund those police officer positions fully once the grant expires. Yeah. Microphone or no? Yeah.
The $3.6 million and 11% increase is a pretty big nut to crack at one time and get a yes vote. So, which leads me to 2 questions. One is, has the City of Fitchburg done any market research to try and determine what's the likelihood that you're going to get a yes vote? And the second question would be, could the amendment have been drafted that the funding could have been implemented over the course of, say, 3 to 5 years as opposed to a 1-year increase?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Yes, the city sent out a survey in February to all residential addresses in the city. Roughly 16,000 surveys went out. Approximately 2,100 responses were gathered from those surveys. And that survey, if any of you recall, listed several different options that could be funded through a referendum. One of those options was a $3.6 million referendum. And of the 2,100 respondents, 48% supported a $3.6 million referendum. Another 8%, or a total of 56% of the respondents, supported at least a $2.9 million referendum. So that was one of the key components that our Common Council used to try to determine what amount might have some support, or at least 50%-ish support within the community. The question about phasing in, state laws are written in such a way that do not allow municipalities to phase in referendums. Only school districts are allowed to do that. It is a quirk of state law. It would be something we could have considered had we had the ability to do so, but we do not, unfortunately. So I know you've got, anybody else have one? No?
Thank you. In regarding the police department positions, is the police department fully staffed, and how long have they been fully staffed, as I believe there's a open recruitment out there currently? And then also, just because we're on the police department, the new police department and how big it is, 50,000 square feet, is that future planning? How many empty office spaces, or can we reduce that footprint? Obviously, you're still in design phase, so you can. So.
Sure. So the police department has 55 sworn members currently, and right now I think they have 3 vacancies that they're looking to fill. That is from a high of, I think, 12 a couple years ago. So they've 11. Okay. So they have steadily made significant progress in filling vacancies that they have had for a variety of different reasons. The size of the police facility, the 2014 study identified an estimated square footage need of about 75,000 square feet that would allow for about 20 years of anticipated growth. Right now, the Common Council has made a decision that it's not appropriate to build a 75,000 square foot facility due to the cost, and therefore have only allocated funding that is likely to get us, the police department, about that 55,000 square feet. When you look at how long that will last, there will be some space in which they can grow into, obviously not as much as if it was built at 75,000 square feet, but there will be space in which they can grow into. How long that will last, I don't precisely know. I would estimate 5 to 10 years before they might be at a situation where they're at space issues again. The current facility is being designed in such a way that would more easily facilitate an addition that could be added at a later date. Largely those areas that are easier to add on, the office space, those sorts of things. So yeah. Other questions? Yeah, sure.
I was just curious because I've noticed in Madison they're adding these passenger loading stations in the middle of the street for buses, which require buses that have doors on both sides. 100 years ago, that made a lot of sense when you had streetcars, when you had the tracks going down the center of the street and they couldn't get over to the curbside. I'm just wondering if this type of thing is involved in the money for transit in Fitchburg, or if they're going to be using conventional busing means for that.
Yeah, I'll take that back from you. As far as the type of buses that they'll utilize, that's a decision that Madison Metro will make. We contract for a transit service for Metro, and we don't necessarily dictate the type of buses or equipment that they use. This money is not being utilized as it relates to bus rapid transit. That's the areas in which you're seeing the new stations coming up in the medians of the roadways. Fish Hatchery Road from McKee to the Beltline is identified as a future bus rapid transit route that will likely end up with those stations in the middle of the road. However, that is not part of this particular referendum, and the funding that is requested with this referendum is identified to be used for those improvements to the current routes 65 and 75. Route B is the route that currently runs down Fish Hatchery Road that will eventually potentially become a bus rapid transit route. Next question? Yeah.
I don't really know much about how assessments work, but I guess I'm wondering, you're talking about the impact for like the next year. So do we assume that if property is reassessed, then that our taxes will go up if property assessments continue to go up?
So property assessments do not automatically correlate to the same percentage increase in your taxes. So for instance, you probably saw if you have a parcel here in the city or a single family home, for instance, that assessment probably went up roughly 20% from your previous assessment. And your assessment, if you owned it in 2022, went up about 20% from its prior assessment a few years earlier. What you haven't seen is a 20% increase in your city taxes over those periods of time. What happens is generally speaking, again, the tax rate declines when the assessments go up. So again, looking back over the last 4 or 5 years, the portion of your tax bill that you paid to the City of Fitchburg has remained relatively flat with less than an overall increase of, say, probably 2 to 3%, 4% in any given year. The example that I've used is that average single-family home has generally had a city tax portion equating to about $2,500 over the last several years, and that has not fluctuated much more than $100 to $150. Where you are seeing tax increases, and we understand this, is through other taxing jurisdictions on your property tax bill. There are 4 taxing jurisdictions on that bill that you get. We know you pay it to the city, but we get about 30% of that tax bill. The other taxing entities are the school district in which you live, the technical college, and Dane County. And obviously, we don't have any control or influence over what they are levying for their particular taxes. For instance, Dane County increased taxes 17% last year on their share of the property tax bill. There have been past school referenda in both Verona and our Oregon school districts recently. So those taxing jurisdictions obviously have the ability to increase those taxes. But when you look specifically at the city portion of your tax bill, that has been relatively flat the last 4 or 5 years. And it does not correlate, the increase in your property taxes does not correlate to the increase in your assessment, generally speaking.
Can I add to that?
You certainly can.
Thank you. This is super confusing. It took me a couple of years to understand why this doesn't. It seems so weird that your assessment would go up and your taxes wouldn't go up. It doesn't make sense. So, but here's the thing that took me a while to figure out. The tax levy is like a static amount of money. Like it's in a year, and we can only levy this exact amount of money, and that's spread out amongst all the properties. And so that cap can go up by net new construction, as we've talked about. So 1 to 3.5% or something, and that it can go up a little bit, and then that's spread amongst all the properties. So because when we do reassessments, pretty much all properties are going up. Everybody's going up. And because everybody's going up, their value proportionally is about the same to everybody else's. So that amount of money is still going to the same number of properties that are all valued a little bit higher, but it ends up being the same because everyone's assessment's gone up. Now, technically, there could be some variation. Like if your assessment skyrocketed and somebody's next to you didn't, there might be a difference. But for the most part, because assessments kind of all go up at the same time and the city's still levying the exact same amount of money with a slight increase, it ends up being the same or slightly increased. Does that make some more sense? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that's where your tax rate is. Yep.
Ag land is assessed at use value. And my question is, do you know or can you tell me how that assessed rate is determined? And where does the city come into that type of assessment as far as getting income from it?
So I can't answer exactly how that ag use land is assessed. I don't work in the assessing department, but I am happy, Roger, to have you speak with our assessor, and he can help explain how exactly they determine the value, assessed value of ag land. But whatever property tax would be paid based upon the assessed value of that land, that would be the same in which any other parcel of property was assessed, and then the subsequent tax revenue was collected. It would go to the city's general fund and be utilized to pay for city services. Yep. And let me know if you'd like me to get you in touch with.
I'll check it out.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
I don't have a question, I just wanted to make a comment. I think everybody wants to feel they get value for what they pay. And back in 2005, unfortunately, my family experienced a house fire, and I am forever indebted to the police department and the fire department, who were just incredibly efficient and professional. And to me, paying my property taxes for that kind of service is important to me. I think you did a good job of explaining, and I don't wish a house fire on anybody, but I can tell you how important it is to have a policeman there in a minute or two helping us out of the house, as well as the fire truck coming down the street and trying to save our property as best they could.
Sorry you experienced that situation, but I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Yeah.
Can you explain the difference, if any, between a volunteer fireman and a part-time fireman?
One is paid and one is not, but generally speaking, the training ideally would be the same.
Is the part-time person housed here when he's here, or does he come from his residence or business?
So generally how we staff our department is the part-time employee is here covering a shift. So they are sitting here, they're either here at the station doing tasks and duties around the station, which then they're available to fill one of those 4 seats within the engine. So in a major incident that requires more than the staff that we have on duty, we'll do 2 things. We'll ask for mutual aid from other neighboring departments to send their staff, and then we'll ask other part-time staff to come in and assist. Jason, we don't have any volunteer staff any longer, do we? So we don't really even have any volunteer staff.
Small town that
No.
blows a siren.
Right, yeah, exactly, yep. No sirens and pagers anymore here, so, yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. Next question, Patrick, you had one?
Could you go back to the referendum question?
Yeah.
Because I want to get this clear, because from earlier questions that I asked, I got a different answer.
This one?
Okay. Now, forget about the referendum and the 3.6 million for a second. The city is otherwise limited to 3.847% increase, a levy of $32,642,047. And what I have understood all the past years, if we go $1 or more over that, we do not get the expenditure restraint reward or grant, whatever it's called. How can we be going over that by $3.6 million and still get this $500,000 grant reward?
Because the community has approved, if the community approves it via referendum, we are now authorized to have that as our levy.
So
which
a
means,
referendum
yeah,
sidesteps that and gets around the state expenditure restraint limits.
that's why we have to go to referendum, and we would still qualify. If this referendum were to pass, we still qualify for the expenditure restraint program.
It's kind of like that part of the budget is in the 32.6 million there, and then the referendum is a secondary side thing of 3.6 million.
Right.
that is approved by, specifically by the residents.
Correct.
So that part is, if we stay within that somehow in lines in the budget, we get the $500,000.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes that clear.
Yep.
I do have another question.
The expenditure restraint program is not the same as levy limits.
Correct. It's an entirely different program.
The
Yep.
expenditure restraint is a series of benchmarks we have to hit financially to show financial restraint in order to get that extra incentive. Levy limits is totally separate. If you go over levy limits, you're charged like a $1 for every one.
Yeah, it's dollar for dollar
So it's a cap.
penalty.
But the expenditure restraint program is a totally different thing. Like you can choose to qualify or not qualify by how you spend. And we qualify almost every year. I think the 1 year reason we didn't qualify was because of the library created to change the calculation.
And that was the plan situation.
Kind of lost me on all of that.
So yeah, I'll try
It's
to.
confusing.
So it is. I mean, this is further evidence of the complication of municipal finance, right? There is a whole host of things that factor into municipal finance between general accounting practices or government accounting practices is I think technically the term, state laws and regulations through Department of Revenue and so forth. But what Alder Gerhardt was conveying is the levy limit is a separate restriction on the city, and the expenditure restraint program is a program within the state that incents municipalities for remaining within certain spending thresholds, and if you stay within those spending thresholds, they will give you a portion of the money available in the expenditure restraint program.
That still sounds like the same thing.
So what happens though is if we go over our levy limit,
That number?
that if we go over the 32 million, there's a dollar for dollar penalty. For every dollar we go over the levy limit that is set by the state, they will assess us a dollar for dollar penalty and reduce our aid that we get, our shared revenue. And again, the expenditure restraint is a separate program that all but I think 1 or 2 years in the last 10 to 15 years, the city has qualified for. And in the times in which they have not qualified for it, that has been a deliberate decision made based on specific circumstances like the library coming on board.
Again, staying within that number?
Yeah, so the levy limit is the amount of money we can spend, the cap of the amount of money we can spend. Expenditure restraint is how we spend that money. So like within that, those choices about where we put that money, we have to meet certain criteria for how we spend this money in order to meet so you can stay within levy limits and not hit expenditure restraint. You could be lower than your levy limit cap and not meet expenditure restraint. But, so it's because it's a totally separate program. If levy limits didn't exist, expenditure restraint could still exist because it's a totally separate program.
What I can do is, why don't I talk to our finance?
From other questions that I asked earlier, I heard that this right here meant we would not get the $500,000. That's why I'm really trying to get this clear.
Yeah. I have talked to our finance director, and she has assured me that we would still qualify for the expenditure restraint program if this referendum passes. What I will do is, why don't I ask her to reach out to you with information on the expenditure restraint program? Sure.
That's why I understood it that way, rather than this way.
Right. I would encourage you to continue the conversation with her.
It's really complicated.
And that's again the nature of municipal finance. Unfortunately, it's not easy to understand, particularly if you don't work in that field. I mean, I don't fully understand every single component of municipal finance, but we're fortunate that we have a great finance director and finance team that specializes in that.
From my questions with her, that we would not get to $500,000.
I believe there may have been a communication that I was copied on where she confirmed that we would with that, but
It's already allocated in the 2025 budget.
Yeah.
The other thing is the money that we get through expenditure restraint, we don't expend that money in the given year.
Right.
So we basically, if we get expenditure restraint, we save it and then we spend it the next year.
Correct.
So that if we happen to not qualify, we're not going to be in a budget deficit. So we're really cautious about how we use expenditure. We don't rely on it for operating expenses. We save it and then we use it for one-time expenses the next year or even the following year after that.
Use it for capital expenditure most of the time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, sure.
So the funding of the 5 police positions, the 3 positions that we are going to potentially fund with the grant, those are part of the 5?
Correct.
Okay. And then what is the planning? Because right now we have 15 positions. And you said over a period of time, we're going to need up to 50 additional. Do we have plans for those additional needs down the road?
I think it's highly unlikely that those 50 positions are going to be added in any, let's say, short period of time of 5 years or less. This referendum is focusing on the 14 positions that were identified as having the highest priority for need. The other, 35, actually there's technically another 44 positions out there over the next 5 years that department heads have identified, are unlikely to be funded. They could be funded if our net new construction was, say, 5 or 6% in any given year. That might allow our levy limit capacity to add additional staff while also maintaining existing services. Anytime a position in the city does come open, the city does take a look at that position and determine if the job duties, for instance, should be updated or if that position should potentially be reclassified into a different role. So there could be some limited situations where that's utilized to try to add these positions. But generally speaking, I've been with the city 25 years, and on average, the city has probably been able to add 1 to 2 positions a year, in particular pre-levy limit conversation. We were able to add a fair number of positions when the 2 TID districts that I mentioned earlier closed a few years ago. That levy limit capacity was used to add staff in a number of situations and departments. But what we're finding obviously now is that the levy limit capacity in the net new construction is not allowing us to do anything but maintain services and not add the staff capacity that's needed. We don't, just 1 second. The only other option that would be available is to come back in, a number of years and say we now would like to add another 10 positions. I mean, that's probably the only realistic way to get those sorts of numbers. And the Common Council recognizes that's not reasonable to ask that. I mean, one of the conversations that we had as we were planning this is, and this is a question that hasn't come up tonight, but I'll just offer it, is how long before you're coming back for the next referendum? Well, we're going to estimate probably 3 to 5 years before we might be coming back for the next referendum, much like you're seeing school districts typically every 3 to 5 years come back. And one of the conversations and considerations that the Common Council had was, well, should we ask for money that will get us maybe 10 years? Maybe that's $7 million. Well, where they ultimately landed on that is they didn't feel that it was fair to levy that money now and just sit on it and and have it sit in reserve, for the next 5 to 10 years before it's needed. They wanted to be respectful to the best extent possible of the taxpayer and the amount that they're being asked for at this given time. So, did you want to add something, Mayor?
Yeah, so one of the other options, how to increase.
Oh, sure.
So how to increase, if we need to increase more staffing, will be if the formula for the levy limit change, or if the state increase our share revenue. As you know, the state is sitting with $3 billion of surplus. $4 billion? Okay, $4 billion surplus. That one is our money that we pay with our income tax, with our sales tax, that money should come back to the municipality and the school district. Because if that money comes to us, we shouldn't be asking you for more money. So this is why we need to also talk to our local, state rep, senators, to start thinking about to change that. And we hope that in November 5th we can make some changes.
Thank you, Mayor. Jay, you want to add something?
Yeah. So you had asked a number of questions about police and fire, and typically in Dane County, police departments have about 1.9 officers per 1,000 population. Right now, we are just under 1.6. even with these 5 new positions, we're still not going to be at 1.9. And so that just means that some things that people are expecting, like, super fast response when someone calls in with some kind of problem, it just takes time because they're off doing other things that have been challenging. For example, Sain Road out here, that construction project, the other half of Sain Road, was supposed to be started this fall. It's not going to be started till April, just because staff capacity in the engineering department, they just, they can only do so many things if they're going to work, a standard work week. Right, and they're doing everything else. So, I mean, I know the engineering department would love to have another employee, but we didn't ask for that in the referendum because it's like, well, we only wanted to ask for so much. I mean, if it were completely left up to me, I probably would have added a couple more positions, would have bumped it up a little bit, but the rest of the council wasn't on board with that, and that's fine. We're asking people. I've heard a lot of comments, and I've been involved in a lot of conversations about how this is an exorbitant amount of money, but it's really not. I mean, if you looked at the staffing study, that would have added about $10 million if we had funded all those positions. So we didn't ask for $10 million. We're just asking for 3.6 to get by. We talked about the fire department too, you may or may not, you probably know this. Maybe no one else in the room does, but, Jason does, but when we send a fire engine out to a call, there's got to be 4 people on that engine. Right now, typically two of those people are full-time staff, full-time career staff, and the other 2 are paid on calls.
Or an intern.
Or sometimes an intern, yes, yeah. So those, but as we've talked about, I mean, when I first got elected to the city council in 1993, we had over 100 people in our, and a lot of them were volunteers then. They didn't, maybe they got paid $2 an hour or some, trivial fee.
Yeah, per response, yeah.
But there just weren't enough. That number has been slowly decreasing. And the other thing that's been decreasing in my discussions with the fire department is the number of shifts those people are willing to work. Some people sign up and they only want to do 1 shift a month, or maybe 2 shifts a month, where when we had all those volunteers years ago, there'd be people who basically lived at the fire station. They didn't want to do anything else except this and their full-time jobs. So they're just, we've had to supplement with full-time staff, with full-time career staff. And the thing is, while that costs a lot more money, you're also getting a lot better service than you used to get. I mean, you're getting people who spend a lot of hours in training, who do this every single day, and not every single day, but every 3 days. Every 3 days, and they are experts at what they do, and so yes, it costs more money, but yes, you're getting a better product. So the six new staff aren't going to get us to 4 career staff on the engine either. And unless in talking with our former chief, with a couple of former chiefs, and even the union representatives, they're not saying that we want to go to 100% full-time career staff. They're saying we still need to have these people, these additional people for filling in for vacations, or someone gets sick, or someone gets pregnant and has to take some time off, or different things happen and it requires different staffing. So we're on a path, and it's going to be a long path. I mean, to get to 50 positions, that's going to take a while, and undoubtedly over the next 10 years, that 50 positions is going to grow, because the community keeps growing. So we're hoping that we can find either other alternative funding possibly, or we can, like the mayor was talking about, maybe getting the state to let go of some of this money they're hoarding, or that they want to give to wealthy people as tax breaks or whatever else they want to do with it. But something's got to change. So anyhow, I just wanted to get a little more detail out there about the public safety positions for sure. Oh, there was also, in one of the conversations I was in, there was a huge discussion that went on for several days about the public information person, which we've included in the referendum. We don't have a person who is responsible for communications in the city between the city and the residents. We have about 27 people who serve that role in one way or another. And what happens is some of the information just doesn't get out. There's not a reliable method, and there's not a consistent method for getting information out to people. The police department and fire department are pretty good about getting press releases out. But when other things happen in the city, even just these meetings for residents to come and talk about this referendum, there hasn't been a good, it's not been good. It's been irritating to me, but it's not been good, and we don't have good bilingual services. About, what is it, 30%? About 30% of the 16%. Yeah, 16% of the population primarily speaks Spanish, and we're often leaving them out of the loop on things that are happening in the city. So when I was mayor back in 2009, I proposed a position like this, and we needed it then. And now it's 15 years later, so we still need it. So hopefully that will give a little more background to some of these positions we're looking for.
Do you want to add something?
No, I want to, if you can clarify, if you want to, okay. If you want to clarify, because there was some misinformation in social media telling that the ARPA fund and the TID money that we use, why we don't use the money to fund those positions. Can you explain why we cannot do that?
Yeah, I can do that. So you are probably aware that there was ARPA funding that was provided by the federal government a few years ago. And then we also, when we closed those TID districts that we talked about earlier, there's that excess increment that can be generated from those that can be utilized. Those funds are one-time funds. You may have seen other jurisdictions use those funds to continue their operations with them and fill gaps in their budget. And now they're obviously struggling to make their budgets balance and need to fill funding gaps because that money has run out. Our Common Council is elected to use that money on one-time things, road projects. We added an additional $1 million to our road resurfacing efforts with that money, for instance. I think there were some equipment purchases made with that money. The tennis court reconstruction at McKee Farms Park was done utilizing those funds. And we can't use those funds, or it would be very poor financial practice to use those funds for ongoing operating expenses within the operating budget. The people that you have that serve you every day, that's an ongoing annual expense. And if we start to use, or if we would have used that money to fund those operations, when the money's gone, how do you then keep the people? So that's an important distinction that's out there with that particular funding is it's one-time funding. It ends at a certain point. It's going to run out. And then if you use it to fund ongoing expenses or operations, you're going to have a gap to fill. And we, our Common Council, avoided that situation by using that money only for projects or other one-time expenses. Other questions at all? Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to get my facts straight. The COPS grant that covers 1/3 of the 5 police officers, 6 police officers?
1/3 of 3.
Yeah, 1/3 of 3, yes.
3 police officers.
Yes.
Okay, now that's one thing. Now,
Yeah.
on a different topic, the police headquarters, I'll try to make this quick. If there was, I think it was, if the training room was included, then we were going to get federal money to cover 5 police positions for 2 years, something like that?
No.
No.
There was something, training room or something or other was cut out, which meant we didn't get federal money for 2 years for a police officer.
There was potentially a federal grant that we could have gotten to pay for the cost of, or at least part of the cost of the training room.
But we didn't get
training
it.
center.
Yeah, there was a state grant.
We
Yep.
didn't get it.
State grant.
Yep.
But that didn't have anything, that was the capital expenditures, not the operating expenditures.
We did apply for it, and our request was not fully funded.
That was a different thing altogether than this COPS grant?
Correct.
Okay.
That was a state program. This is a federal program. And this program has existed for decades.
This is a federal program?
This is a federal program, the grant that hires police officers.
Can you explain that we
Yeah.
usually don't apply for grant to fund position because that will create a structural deficit in our, so that one was, they applied, they got it, but it wasn't like, we don't do that. We don't apply for grant for a staffing purpose because you create a structural deficit because.
I understand.
Okay, so this was it. That one, I think this grant was kind of like, we got it, but.
Right, I mean, obviously, when you're awarded that level of funding, it does, and the timing of the funding is also a little bit challenging because when this grant was awarded to the city, it was after the budget had just been passed or was about to be passed. It was past the time in which we could have potentially even amended the budget to build these positions in and the funding that would have been necessary to have them, and then ultimately, obviously, set aside that funding over that 3-year period that would then cover it once they were there. So that's one of the logistical issues with this particular grant is the timing in which it was awarded.
Yeah, and I remember that was part of the problem, and by getting that clear, that kills my next question.
Excellent. We are at about 8:10, which I know nobody expected to be here this long potentially. Are there any other pressing questions that I can answer? Otherwise, I'll just wrap up with a couple of quick points. One of the things you'll see here on the slide is ways in which the city does work to communicate with its residents. If you scan that QR code or go to, in particular, our city website, you can sign up for what's called a Notify Me function, and you can select particular things you want to learn more or know more about, city meetings, for instance, and what's on agendas, and you can enter an email or a text message or a phone number and get an email or text message when new information is posted on that. I do want to thank you for coming this evening. If you do have any other questions as you go back and think about this information, or if you just say, I just thought of this, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is listed here. My phone number is listed here. There is also a site specifically dedicated to the referendum on our city website. You'll see a little tile about halfway or two-thirds of the way down the screen that says referendum. Click on that, and there's a whole host of information there, including some of the information that was provided to you tonight. So we can be available for some informal questions if anybody has something you want to chat about for a little bit here, but otherwise, we do really appreciate you coming out to learn more about the referendum and spending now over 2 hours with us this evening. So thank you very much. Have a good night.